What was the worst way you saw someone ruin their life? A fellow Barfly I knew was an MMA fighter, had won some regional matches as an amateur, his gym was promoting him, he was in talks with a MMA promotion. A guy mouths off to him, he replies, the guy takes a swing, he punches him and the guy hits his head on the pavement, dies. 5 years for manslaughter, except he was also a career criminal, mostly theft, but he was up for anything. Gets the bright idea that he and a buddy should do a home invasion robbery of one of the local fences. Fence being a guy who acts as a middleman with stolen goods. They figured he'd have cash and loot on hand. So, he's going to rob a guy who knows who he is. Well, the fence shts himself when they burst in, puts a knife into Steve, who tries to run but bleeds out in the stairwell. The fence got let off for self-defense. Judge told him on any other day, Mr. Fence, I'd likely be throwing you in prison, but considering Steve's record, putting a knife into him was probably the best plan. A friend of mine decided to not use protection with the girl he just met for a whole weekend, without asking if she was using any contraception at all and finishing inside. I often feel really bad for this poor baby dragged into this world out of sheer stupidity. I know so many people who do this and then are surprised they get pregnant. I had a cousin who just graduated from high school when she first got pregnant. I knew she knew about birth control and condoms, and just being safe in general. So when I asked her why, she said, oh well, we thought if it happens it happens. This isn't a fortune cookie. This is a living, breathing child you're talking about. This is the mentality of a lot of people in the Bible Belt area. I had extended family who actively encouraged their 18-19-year-olds to get married. Guess what? Less than a decade later, none of them are still married, but now, they have kids to worry about. The parents usually end up feeling resentful because they feel like they missed out on their 20s, and decide that they'll just catch up on all that partying now, and chunk their kid off on whatever relative will have them, leaving their kids feeling like a burden or abandoned. It's a cycle I got tired of watching. I just decided to wait till my 30s when I'm more stable to have kids. It seemed like an easier way to deal with life. 19-year-old cousin, started hanging with gangs, introduced to meth, then back into prostitution, had done it previously when she was homeless and gained a gambling habit also, faked pregnancy, and stole from family, and made it look like others were involved, which irreparable trust was broken between innocent parties that some have never recovered from. Wish it was. The faked pregnancy was made worse in the fact she said her ex-boyfriend had tried to stab her, but only gave her a few nicks. While at my mother's house, her ex was supposedly part of a notorious biker gang, but what she didn't realize was my best friend's family was part of another chapter of my friend just grew up around it, but didn't join. So there were a lot of interesting characters I met over the year. I took her over to my friend's parents' place to see if I could get the ex-boyfriend talked to, as they are very respected within the gang, and once she realized what would happen, she quickly changed her attitude about it all, which I found really weird, and is what made me question what was going on. A lot of what happened affected so many other family members, and even made my mother question my loyalty to her, which to me was worst of all, as I've always had a great relationship with her. So broke my heart, she had to even ask me if I was involved in the theft side of it. She's left many years ago, and has somewhat got her life together. Not that I want anything to do with her, and to be honest, if I ever saw her, I'd struggle not to punch her in the face. Honestly, at 19, that sounds less like she ruined her own life, and more like the people around her ruined it. That's just a kid. At 19, some people can be incredibly naive, but she was very switched on when it came to doing what's right for people before she decided to do certain things. We were flatmates at one point. She stole my half of the rent money for meth, which I didn't know about until the landlord rung me up asking me what was going on. I asked her what was up, as it was a couple weeks worth of rent, and she came up with a plausible excuse which I can't recall at the moment. Then a few weeks later, since got another call from the landlord who was furious. He called me a liar and a thief, and that I had 2 days to get my stuff and leave. Plus, the fake pregnancy thing had an even more extreme ending, which I don't want to get into as it requires a load of explaining. Her parents were house, so in some respects, you're kinda right. She was sent to my mum's house to live by her mother without my mother being told, because her mum didn't want to deal with her trouble anymore. My family is very respect-orientated, and my mother is one of the most loving, kind, and generous people you could ever wish to meet. After a few weeks things got weird. The neighbors came over saying that my cousin had talked shti about my mother, saying she was full of shti, a bichichi etc., which she denied, but the neighbor was elderly and never been the type to talk shti for the sake of it. And I'll tell you the most faffed up Favkin part of all it, which is that while she did this shti, my stepfather was being treated for terminal cancer. My brother was diagnosed with lung cancer a year later, and both died within months of each other, which absolutely broke me. So that Bichi knew better, homie. She just decided that S3X and drugs was more important than good caring people. Favk her forever. I watched a mate lose 2 houses and $500,000 to cocaine in 1 year. Not rich by any means, but had a nice cushy gov job. We both worked as civilians for the gov brick house on a golf course. BMU 335I, work swing shift with overtime for that extra differential. This happened really fast too. I remember one day, he asked me if I could look at his car as it was skipping, so I did, and I fixed it. He was grateful. The next time I saw him a month or 2 later, I asked if the car was still doing well. His response, "Oh man, I had to let it go back man, the interest rate was just too much. Yada yada yada." I thought, okay, that's reasonable. Another couple of months went by, and I learned that he let his house go back to the bank also. Asked him what happened, and his response was, "Man, they don't tell you that with buying a house, your taxes and stuff keep going up every year." He had been in that house for a few years, didn't make sense to me, but whatever. The next thing I know, he messages me out of the blue asking to borrow $80 and that he will get it back to me by Friday. Now, something isn't adding up. I also haven't seen him come in or go out the gates at work. We usually cross paths as I work day shift, and he works swing shift. So I messaged another buddy of ours that he was closer to and grew up with. The first response back was, "Don't give him any money, man. We've been trying to help him, he's just gonna use it for drugs since he lost his job." He lost a government job. Do you know how hard it is to get fired from a government job? Anyway, apparently, he got caught stealing from a store and had drugs on him when they caught him. So fast forward to Christmas time last year. People are posting home CCTV footage of package pirates. Quality is shti so you can't make out a face, but his walk, it's unique. We knew it was him. Multiple videos. Stealing packages and stealing lawn equipment off of people's lawn are trailers. But what got him finally was him walking out of a store with a bike. Face plain as day on camera. I think they arrested him a few days later. People still say they see him around town walking or riding a bike with random items on him. He even messaged me around that time, wanting to try and sell me brand new surround sound systems that were $400 for like $80 and shti. It's sad, man. It really is. I also have other friends now who use cocaine recreationally, and some that are starting to take it a little too far. They become habitual liars also. They start lying about their usage, and then the lying moves to other things. I have plenty of friends that use or used to use cocaine at all levels of income. But cocaine is simply not a habit you can maintain for long if you don't have a decent amount of money and reliable enough connections to consistently get any. The end result is usually an increasing dependence on cocaine or a switch to heavy, dirtier, cheaper alternatives like prescriptions, crack, meth, and even alcohol and others. Or you simply stop doing cocaine. I am only 36, but looking back to high school to the present, cocaine was rather popular amongst many of my friends in their early 20s. Most of those friends stopped after a few years. Thing was, the main instance started when a few friends got themselves commission-based sales jobs. They go into work and deal with other big shot sales guys with fancy haircuts and jewels and shti on their jeans and those creepy pointy shoes that fancy men wear. They are portrayed as very successful with how they behave and dress and the types of cars they buy and how hot their wives are. They groom new salespeople to be successful at the job. They start dressing and acting like the people they aspire to be. They even get some sales and some decent commission checks and a taste of the good life. and they get noticeably successful results from that behavior. But now, they can afford cocaine more often than occasionally. Now, they meet reliable connections to afford and obtain cocaine from their new friends. Anyway, I had these two friends that got these fancy jobs. And over the course of about a year, these totally normal skater stoner, edgy grunge types evolved into total douchebag chads with $80 haircuts, popped collars and pointy elf shoes and metal and gems, and shit glued to their $200 jeans. They started doing cocaine a lot, all the time, every weekend, all weekend, then every day all day. Even though they were officially making really good money, the lease payment on the Audi TT, the $2,600 condo rent, the bottle service, and the cocaine habit only built up. The $8,000 commission checks covered most of it. But the new income level opened up lines of credit that is usually denied to poor folk. So now, they were making shitty loads of money, but still not enough to maintain the lifestyle that they were assuming. But for every career cokehead that succeeds and stays ahead of the expenses of the lifestyle, there are a dozen people who fall off and burn out. At the end of the day though, you need to maintain that work ethic that earned you the 8,000 commission checks, and any business handing out 8,000 commission checks is insanely cutthroat, so they inevitably got spit back out by the machine that made them. Except they are now full-blown cokeheads. Hard for the rest of us friends to even fully understand the problem they were in, because when you interact with these douchebag chad types, they only ever present an extremely successful facade. It's like they were faking it until they made it. Then they made it. Then they lost it, and then they were just trying to keep faking it. They lied about the reasons they were fired. They lied about having saved most of that money they were making, and the only reason they didn't have money was because they invested it. You know, stocks and bonds and stuff us poors wouldn't understand even if they could be bothered to explain it. Then they started taking whatever narcotic pain K1 they could get. They started literally smoking crack. They diverged around this point. One of them went towards the uppers and the other ended up going towards the downers. One worked their way to heroin, the other worked their way to meth. In the transition, they lost everything they had and everyone that ever gave a damn through betrayal and theft and lies. I guess any point I am making here is that cocaine seems to be a big problem that most people can't afford to have a problem with. It has just been my impression that cocaine destroys the lives of rather successful people because they get exposed to it more and more as they succeed and mimic the behavior of their new rich successful friends. And then it is just a game of trying to keep up appearances as the drug does more and more damage to their mind and bodies. This one sentence you posted made me think of those two guys that would show up to the parties with mounds of cocaine and lame stories about how rich they had become. I saw one of them not long ago and he was absolutely gacked the fuck out and visibly jaundiced. I would probably feel bad if he wasn't such a douchebag. My uncle said to me once that when people start making more money, they usually don't save more. They go further into debt because their value of life has increased, therefore all their expenses increase as well. Pretty crazy how accurate it is. You see it all the time. Someone gets a raise or a new job, and suddenly, they just plunge further into debt with fancier toys. My parents gave me solid piece of advice. Some people aren't rich. They are just in debt at a higher standards of living. Changed my whole perspective about saving money and taking out loans. Raised by a single mother, basic necessities were met, but that was about it. No fancy clothes or big screen TV or holidays. Had a friend whose mother was in the same situation, but she had all those stuff. I didn't know how this was possible until my mother explained that that woman was in debt, that all that stuff was bought on credit, and that my mother didn't spend what she didn't have. Still one of my most valuable life lessons. I'm so paranoid about this. I worked a min-wage job for a really long time, and only at 30 did I get into something that paid more. Now make quite good money, but I just got so used to a low standard of living that my wants really aren't that expensive. It's nice to be able to afford dinner out when I want, a new game, or to get a massage without having to budget. So I am actually saving a lot more, but housing prices here are so insane. Still living in the same rent-controlled apartment I was 13 years ago, cause moving before I can buy would mean paying at least double the rent. Anyway, I guess my point was I've managed to avoid this trap, but I think mainly because I'm so conscious of it. If I make more, just invest more. Lifestyle creep is always a potential thing, but it's only a threat to people very new to money in the early days, say over 100,000 of annual income. Make 250,000, you could still have no investments by living absurdly above your station, hit 500,000 a year, and you gotta be nearly the dumbest favk alive, not to be putting money into endless investments. It's part of the class. Not doing it makes you look insane. Your peers will chat about what people own here and there over a drink, and most people earning 250,000 plus start investing smarter. One of my friends turned to alcohol and all, but gave up on life after his mom passed. It eventually caught up with him and he passed away at the age of 32. The sad part is that there were signs that he wanted to get better and wanted to get life together again. It was just too little too late, and he went about it the wrong way. A guy I used to work with got himself into crazy levels of debt. A local guy won the lottery. Nothing major, but still life-changing. Something like $30,000. We were all on our lunch break, talking about what we would do if we won that much. I would pay off these credit cards, or I would trade in my car for a newer model. This guy says that it wouldn't make a difference. At 23, he was already over $200,000 in debt between credit cards and personal loans. He would just get another loan to pay something off and keep borrowing. A few months later, he was complaining about how he was now an additional $50,000 in debt on top of it. This guy was only making around $40,000 a year. He got the bright idea to file bankruptcy. Lost his car, his house, his job. Last I knew he was staying at friends' houses couch surfing, working for a pittance, just trying to survive. My brother, heroin addiction. He was always an odd kid, but a very talented guitar player, and one of the most thoughtful, caring, funny, and unique people I've ever known. He passed away 4 years ago from a fentanyl overdose. I miss him every day, but he brought so much joy to the lives of those around him that the memory of him isn't a sad one. I laugh way more than I cry when I think about him. My first wife and alcohol. She had lots of people to support her. She was in the hospital for a week to dry out, then a treatment program for a month. It lasted 3 months before she was back on the bottle. Her doctor warned her that she has a third of a liver left, and if she didn't stop, she'd die, which she did. 18 months after she last went back to the bottle, her ankles swelled up, as did her legs, as the kidneys and dying liver couldn't process the fluids, and when she finally succumbed, she looked like she was 5 months pregnant, as the fluids were now accumulating in the lower torso. So, dead at 38, that was back in 1996. My mother-in-law has been like this for many years. Summer before last, they told us she would die as her liver had shut down and her kidneys were not working. She also got encephalitis due to the toxins that her kidneys were not removing, affecting her brain. We thought she would die in front of us, but she didn't, and days became weeks, and eventually she was moved to a care home that she will not leave, with no more life-saving medicine anymore except morphine. She's still in the care home now somehow, and I am convinced she will outlive us all. Addiction is awful. I believe, as far as my husband is concerned, the mother he grew up with died a long time ago. She is only 51. My stepfather died of liver cirrhosis in May 2021 because alcohol was his only way of coping with his severe chronic pain. Pain he had because of injuries he obtained in the Air Force. Pain that the VA stopped managing cold turkey because the meds they were giving him weren't nearly enough, and he used weed to make it the rest of the way. They found the doc, stopped his narcotics immediately, and refused to work with him to get help. It was a slow descent over several years, and when he died, he was so swollen all over from the edema that he looked, it's crass, but he looked like a Balin, like Harry Potter's Aunt Marge. His liver had failed so badly that he had toxins building up in his blood and brain, which completely addled his cognitive functioning. By the time he died, as a complication from a fall which fractured one of his vertebrae, which was just the final straw for his system, he didn't understand what was going on anymore. He didn't know where he was. He wasn't coherent enough to even recognize my mom and be able to say any goodbyes or last words. I wasn't close to him, but watching how his deterioration tore my mom apart, watching how badly she grieved after he passed, because even when you see it coming, you're almost never really prepared for it, broke my heart. Alcoholism K1 led my stepdad. It's such a scary, tragic addiction. My dad broke his back and pelvis in a work accident over a decade ago. He now walks at a 75-degree angle and suffers from severe chronic pain. Most days, he stays in his recliner 24/7. Well, we all know narcotics are bad. So due to the opioid panic, he was forced off of all his medication. He never failed a drug test, never filled his medications early, and his pain meds were locked up and doled out accordingly by either myself or my mom. He went from being slightly active to a complete couch potato, because his pain is so unmanaged. Now, get to watch his legs continue to atrophy and watch him drink himself to death. We've done everything we can to try and stop his drinking. But no matter what, the moment he is unsupervised, he's driving 5 minutes down the road for some 100 proof vodka. How our healthcare system can be so utterly incompetent and uncaring is beyond me. All of his doctors are well aware he is deteriorating, and all they do is shrug their shoulders and continue to offer insane amounts of gabapentin. I drank to the point of needing a transplant. I was admitted to the hospital because I became so sick and feeble. I was able to leave the hospital and was given a kind of prescription laxative to help keep ammonia out of my system when the liver is compromised. Fluids spill over into any open areas around the organs, so every so often you go to the hospital and they drain it out. They ultrasound to find the best location, and then they push a huge needle right through your stomach to drain fluid. The fluid looks just like beer, and it would fill several liters. I was fortunate and was able to get a transplant. You do not want to go through this. When healthy and drinking, it's easy to feel invincible. You aren't. I think my stepdad only let my mom take him to the hospital once, when it was all starting to truly spiral downward, and they drained 10 liters of fluid from him. He was even more swollen when he died than he was during that visit. Congrats on getting the transplant, though. You had to get and stay sober to qualify for the list, and lots of people don't ever see surgery. Obviously, it's never ideal to need one, but it's good that you're still alive. My ex Sil had a really bad issue with alcohol for years. It got to the point that she couldn't eat. If she did, she vomited. If she didn't, she vomited. But even with all that, she'd still drink. When she met her ex, she cut back and then, as far as I know, didn't drink while she was pregnant around 11 years ago. After baby was born, she went back to drinking. Her ex, who was really good at manipulating all of us, we thought he was a good guy, was very toxic. They would fight all the time. One night they fought. She was sober that night. He left, and next thing she knows, police CAS is at her door. He was pissed she wouldn't let him back in, so he called the cops and said she was drunk and alone with their baby. He never tried to help her stop, never supported her. Baby was taken into CAS custody. She was kicked out and had to live in a shelter for a while. No family would take her in as her alcohol issues caused her to be violent a few times, and she would be really mean. Baby was in foster care for 6 months. They said she could have baby back if she went to AA on a regular basis. She did, and had to live with an approved family member. She moved back in with her mom. A few times after, she fell off the wagon. Her turning point was when she ended up in hospital around 10 years ago. Anything I write after this was relayed to me from my ex-husband. She was bleeding internally and almost died. Mix of the drinking and something to do with Tylenol. No, she didn't try to OD. It was pretty touch and go. I would get updates from my ex. She pulled through, and the doctor warned her that she doesn't stop drinking when she was released from hospital, she would die. It took all this along with so much other stuff I also witnessed to make her stop. Her and her daughter still live with her mom, but she's sober, as healthy as she can be, and has had a steady job for about 6 years. Her daughter is happy and healthy. She was able to be there to help her mom when her grandmother she moved in with them had Alzheimer's and eventually passed, and because she listened to her doctor, she's here for her daughter. I'm sorry for your loss. Even if someone doesn't die, we can still lose them to the addiction or disease. They're no longer the person we knew. I hope you've been able to recover from the loss and pain.